When the warriors came out of their master's hall, where had they hid their power? Where was their armor and their arms? They looked so poor and helpless as the arrows were showered upon them on the day they came from their master's hall. When the warriors marched back again to their master's hall, where did they hide their power? They had dropped the sword and dropped the bow and arrow. Peace was on their foreheads, and they had left the fruits of their lives behind on the day they walked back again to their master's hall. This film is made for the subalterns and troop leaders of 20th Lancers, the unit I was commissioned into, and perhaps the one where I spent some of the happiest years of my life. I joined the regiment in December 1965, after the war, and first saw Chhamb for the first time in February 1966, when we reoccupied it. In this film, the enemy assessments, deployments down to troop levels, and the timings of the engagements during the operations are 100% correct. They have been extracted from the regimental war diary written by the Commandant, Lieutenant Colonel O.P. Suri, immediately after the war. In September 1965, only C Squadron was located in the battle zone. The regiment minus 2 squadrons was in Pathankot, and B Squadron was at Leh. The individual incidents and personalities mentioned by me are my inputs and impressions on joining the regiment immediately after the war. These memories are from many recce's, preparation and selection of tank positions for subsequent battle, shikars, badakhanas, and several other squadron activities. They are the squadron lore, told by an inquisitive troop leader who had missed the battle of a lifetime and looked at awe at the wonderful men he had been thrown together with. Firstly, our tank, the AMX-13. We had held the tank for 10 years and knew the equipment backwards. With a simple gunner sight, semi-automatic loading, and a direct ejection of the fired case, we were able to engage 3 tank targets within 90 seconds, which was extremely fast for those days. Due to the riverine terrain, our tank was prone to track shed, but April onwards, from up ablaze, our drivers had driven extensively, were confident, and knew what to do. We had been moved up and down the battle zone several times and knew the ground backwards. We also knew that we were up against one of the most modern tanks of the world. The Patton, with a 90mm gun and a coincidence rangefinder, which had a first round hit capability. However, Upper Blaze had given us plenty of time to train. In 20th Lancers, there were 3 things that were drummed into our heads as subalterns. They were firstly, be bold and never be afraid to make mistakes. गिरते हैं शाह सवार मैदान जंग में, वो तिफल क्या गिरेगा जो घुटने के बल चलता हो. Secondly, the old Sikh dictum, निश्चय कर अपनी जीत करूं. And thirdly, tanks, like horses, have idiosyncrasies and are not all the same. Get to know the one you ride. The team. Bhaskar was the squadron commander, and as you guys would now put it, he was a cool dude. He was from my school, Doon, and a fine 400-meter runner. Told a joke with a deadpan face, tapped his gold flake cigarettes on a silver cigarette case, and roared with laughter. He had style and was a born leader. Kuti was his 2IC and had light eyes, which hid the determination of a stout heart. In the subsequent pictures, due to lack of photos, I have used some lookalikes. However, what's important is that the names are remembered. Rasaldar Amar Singh was the senior JCO. He walked with a slight limp, but was an absolute fireball. The troop leaders. I knew Ravi Laroya from NDA, and he was always the strong and silent type. Govind Singh Sahib was one of the last few of the Jodhpur Lancers personnel left. He had the politeness of a prince and the instincts of a panther. He always delivered. Naib Rasaldar Bhamar Singh and Dafadar Hari Mangal were enthusiastic tankmen, but were unfortunately killed in the tank battle on the very first day. Daryao Singh was the SDM and awarded a Sena Medal. He went on to become the senior JCO of the Rajput Squadron in 1971 and was the senior JCO in the Battle of Longewala. Jaswant Singh was the SQMD and hailed from UP, but spoke fluent Marwadi, which was the language of the squadron at that time. Tej Singh was the intelligence NCO, a good basketballer, and was Bhaskar's shadow, never far away from the tank or the rover. Son Singh Bhati was the officiating SRO and was awarded the Chief of Army Staff's Commendation Card. Rasaldar Magan Chand was the Adim Troop JCO. Operational area. Chhamb dominated the crossing places across the Munawwarwali Tavi, which led to a Class 9 road from Palanwala to Akhnur, which was the communication center. The Phagla ridge ran roughly north to south and observed the ceasefire line, which was along the Deora Nala east. Munawwar Tavi had 3 crossing places at Mandyala, Chhamb, and Dhad. The ground which controlled the battle area was firstly Phagla Ridge, which ran from north to south, Guda Heights, and Mandyala, which dominated the crossing of the Munawwar Tavi, which went on to Palanwala and then to Akhnur. And lastly, Bucho Mandi. I will draw your attention to the area of Burejal Melu, from where the ceasefire line took off northwards in J&K. A Pakistani attack from the west to east direction across the CFL would indicate that Pakistani intention was restricted to J&K, whereas if it included the north-south direction, it involved violating the IB and then was a declaration of an all-out war. The entire battle of Chhamb on 1st September was fought in an area of 10 kilometers by 8 kilometers between the CFL and the Munawwarwali Tavi. 90 medium tanks against 14 light AMX tanks. Enemy threat and own deployment. An assessed threat of an armoured regiment and an infantry division was expected. The enemy's likely aim could be to secure the crossings at Mandyala and Chhamb and subsequent capture of Akhnur. The main attack was expected at Dhalla Burejal with the subsidiary at Koel Pir Jamal. Own deployment. 191 Brigade was to act as the brigade screen west of the Tavi. The main task, however, was to fight a defensive battle in Akhnur. Brigadier Manmohan Singh had therefore deployed 3 Mahar, 6 Sikh Ally and C Squadron 20th Lancers on the ceasefire line to gauge the weight and direction of the attack. The desired delay would be imposed on the Munawwarwali Tavi, with 15 Kumaon holding a compact defense at Mandyala and the remainder troops of 6 Sikh Ally falling back to Chhamb. Subsequently, 6-5 Gurkhas at Kalidhar would constantly interfere with the build-up with observed artillery fire from its imposing heights on the Kalidhar feature. Remember, armor engagements were only during telescope light and during the day. Only infantry attacks were possible at night. Bhaskar was tasked with coordinating the anti-tank defences for the sector. On 20th of August, the following anti-tank layout plan was approved by the Commander 191 Brigade. Firstly, 2 troops of tanks in the Port Dhalla region to cover the Burejal and Koel Pir Jamal approach. 1 troop to cover the Munawwar Chhamb axis. And the reserve troop was to be retained at Barsala. 5 RCLs were with the Sikh Allied Battalion on the ceasefire line, and another 6 RCLs covering north of Phagla, which was considered a low-threat area. The Pakistani plan. GOC 12 Div of Pakistan had given his orders at Khania on the 28th of August as follows. In the Phase 1, destruction of enemy west of the Tavi to include Lalial, Deva, Sakrana and Chhamb. Phase 2, capture of Akhnur by 10 Brigade Group. And Phase 3, 1 or 2 brigade must then be prepared to operate on the Akhnur Jhangar and Akhnur Dharamsala axis. 20th to 30th August, Pakistan had launched Op Gibraltar. With the stepping up of infiltration by Pakistan, extensive patrolling was carried out by C Squadron along with the infantry, and 2 things came to light. Firstly, there was large-scale enemy movement south of the international border. Secondly, there was abnormally high recce activity west of the CFL. At last light on 30th September, C Squadron was harboured 1,000 yards south of Chhamb. The evening of 30th September was no different to any other evening. After the evening stand to, the sentries were deployed and the troops went across to the Ford water truck, which was parked near a few flat stones and designated at the water point. They had their baths, after which they walked across to the unit mandir for a brief prayer and thence went on to the langar. It was pitch dark, and the only sound that you could hear was from a 300-watt charging engine, which charged the 180 AHC's batteries for the next day. Bhaskar had called his O group to his 112-pounder tent, the most comfortable tent, as it had just one bulb which was lit for the briefing by a 180 AHC secondary battery. The tension had mounted over the last 2 weeks, and after discussing the usual administrative problems, he clearly gave instructions that the off-road tank with its engine out must be kept loaded and ready for battle. Little did he know that the O group would be back 4 hours later amidst heavy shelling for the final briefing before the battle. Initial deployment on 1st September. At 0330 hours, the enemy started shelling the squadron location, and the shelling continued till 0530. Bhaskar ordered the troops to move at 4:30 based on the inputs from the recce troop LOs at Bhusa and Dhalla. The patrolling and ground feedback had indicated the maximum activity south of the international border, so the psychological balance was towards Munawwar. Govind's troop had the bias towards Mual, whereas Bhanwar Singh Saab looked after Dhalla. Harimangal's troop watched the CFL. Ravi's troop was kept as a reserve at Balial. The infantry attacks on the forward companies had commenced long before first light. By 0530 hours, the shelling and war cries of the infantry had petered out, and the odd vehicles were seen moving back. The steady growl of the Pakistani tanks could be heard from the west as the sun came up behind us. The troop listening drills were over, and the recce troops gave inputs on the advancing Pakistani tanks. The first engagement took place at 0605 hours, and with it came the intense artillery fire from our guns. "Contact, wait out," was the cry from the troops in contact, and the whistling and roar of the arty shelling continued as both ours and the enemy artillery engagement started. It was impossible to judge the enemy numbers, but by 0830 hours, 5 enemy tanks lay brewing on the Deoranala east. 3 RCL guns had also been destroyed by us, and an ammunition vehicle hit. Harimangal's troop was moved north towards Muel to contest the oncoming Pak tank destroyers. In the Mali, an enemy jeep was also captured, and the trickle of enemy information had also started coming in. 2 of our tanks had been hit, and Naib Rasaldar Bhamar Singh had been killed in action. By 0900 hours, the enemy had pressed forward. The Thalla and the Muel infantry positions had been overrun, and Burejal was still hanging on. By 1000 hours, Bhaskar and Kuti had also joined the battle, and Govind Singh's and Bhavar Singh's troops were north and south astride Por. The enemy armour identified with the main attack was 11th Cavalry. It had a squadron of tank destroyers heading towards Munawwar. 2 of its other squadrons were astride Por. Large dust plumes were seen heading north and in the distance towards Phagla. A squadron of Patton tanks was also reported heading towards the brigade headquarters at Mandyala. We also realized that the Pakistani units had 2 squadrons of Patton's M48 and a squadron of Sherman's M36 2B tank destroyers. 1030 hours. Another 5 Patton tanks were destroyed by them. Ravi Leroy's troop was ordered to move north to cater for the imminent threat to brigade headquarters. By 1100 hours, the situation had clarified further. 13th Lancers was in the north, with a squadron of Patton tanks at Mandyala, out of which 2 had been destroyed. A squadron of tank destroyers was in the area of Tutanwala. The 3rd squadron of 13th Lancers had not been located. 11th Cavalry had 2 squadrons astride Por, but they had suffered 8 casualties, so the squadrons were down to about 60% strength. The 3rd squadron of 11th Cavalry was heading towards Munawwar. 4 of our tanks had been destroyed, so virtually Bhamar Singh's troop and Harimangal's troop had ceased to exist as entities. There were just 10 tanks left for the Battle of Phagla Ridge. Our own deployment. Ravi's troop was moving north to contact the enemy at Sakrana. Govind Singh's troop was covering the Munawwar-Chhamb axis. Bhaskar and the ad hoc troop were covering the Tutanwala side, and the off-road tank remained at Balyal. From 1100 hours, the battle raged astride the Tutanwala Nala. The Rao Singh static tank destroyed 2 enemy tanks. The enemy had lost another 4 tanks. Although he tried to outflank from the south, Bhaskar's skillful handling ensured that the line was not broken. 13th Lancers did not try to exploit from the north, as Ravi's troop, although completely destroyed, had already extracted the prize and prevented any further penetration from the north. The enemy was finally stopped at 1600 hours. But all was not over. The use of air power was permitted by our PM at 1700 hours, and our own air force swooped down and destroyed our entire A1 and A2 echelons on either side of the Munawwar-Wali tunnel. 2 tanks, an ARV, 7 3 tons, 3 1 tons were completely charred within minutes. Last light was approaching, and Bhaskar stood amongst the burning vehicles of the A1 and A2 echelons. He was controlling the closing in of the remainder 4 tanks to guard the Chhamb crossing. From the retreating Sikh ally personnel, he came to know that one of our forward tanks, the crew had been killed, but the tank looked undamaged. In the dusk, he asked the Adam Troop personnel recovering from the airstrike for a volunteer to retrieve the tank. Lansdar Khushal Singh stepped forward and, along with two personnel of 6th Sikh ally, returned 90 minutes later with the tank. He was mentioned in dispatches for his courageous action. Night fell and the squadron closed in and covered the fort. By now, the sounds of battle had been silenced, and the only steady sound was of the flow of the river. The only thing that could be seen was the stranded jeep and the tank in the water, and the abandoned ground position antenna of a unit used for shepherding the stragglers across the fort. The day of fighting was over, but the squadron was not willing to relent and knew that at any moment an explosive situation could develop. Kuti remained deployed west of the river till 23:30 hours, when the enemy tanks' engines were heard starting to commence their line-ahead advance to the river. Bhaskar then ordered the withdrawal to Chaurian. By then, the enemy infantry had already reached the fort, and a fresh crossing place had to be found. 17 Pakistani tanks had been destroyed that day. The squadron had, however, paid very dearly for this tally. Out of the present strength of about 90, one officer, one JCOs, and 8 ORs were killed in action on the first day. 7 men reported to the 28th Brigade ADS in the early hours of 2nd September, as no medical cover was available on the first day of battle. 10 tanks, an ARV, and all 11 B vehicles of the squadron had been destroyed, but the squadron still hung on to the fort with the 4 surviving tanks. We are proud of the heroes of the Battle of Phagla Ridge. Bhaskar, who conducted this incredible battle, and despite the 90 tanks facing his 14 AMXs, fought aggressively and tenaciously forward of the river obstacle and broke the momentum of the enemy attack instead of choosing the easier defensive line on the Munawwar Tawi and allowing the enemy an easy run. Ravi, for his bravery in the Sakrana Grove, where he ensured that his action made it clear to the enemy that further progress on his front would be expensively contested and heavy payment extracted. His whole troop was wiped out in the engagement. SDM Daryao Singh, for his cool courage in engaging the enemy from an AFV without an engine, knowing that he would be easy pickings for the enemy tank who would surely respond. Sohan Singh Bhati, for his steady and accurate engagement in a very, very tense situation. And Kuti, for the cool and calmness his presence brought. And for leading the 4 remaining tanks of the entire squadron back at night across the Tawi at 23:30 hours on an unreconnoitered crossing south of the main one, which was by then swarming with enemy. And there were many others too who were not awarded for their bravery, but the entire squadron knew what they had done. Hisam Singh, a Rajput from Hisar, who drank only on Holi, and that too hardly remembered Holi, as he would put the bottle to his lips, stand on top of his troop box, and finish the bottle in one go. He was a 3-ton ammunition lorry driver. Having watched an ammunition lorry replenishing a tank in the field, hit by the enemy tank and blown to smithereens, he calmly drove up to the same tank, unloaded the ammunition, replenished it, and drove back. When he returned, he was asked, "Didn't you see the vehicle before you blown up?" To which he calmly replied, "साहब, भैरों सिंह का एमिनिशन खत्म और हम में इतनी ही हिम्मत नहीं कि उसे एमिनिशन पहुंचा दे। यो तो हो ना सकता साहब." There were many, many others like him, all with their own stories. These men will be remembered as in the Battle of Agincourt. This elite band of brothers, this tightly bound group that lived and fought the Battle of Phagla Ridge on the 1st of September 1965, relived and remembered each year as if it were yesterday. From this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile. This day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in India now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that forth with us on Chhamb Day.